Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to NVTAC, the National Veterans Technical Assistance Center webinar series. This afternoon, we have a great webinar scheduled for you, Job Retention Approaches, and it's going to be led by Pat Tucker from Advocates for Human Potential. Before we turn things over to Pat, I just want to go through a few logistical pieces for everyone. First of all, one thing that you'll notice is that your phone lines have been muted. So you will not be able to talk during the webinar, and this is for a lot of reasons, but mainly because occasionally folks need to do other things and put us on hold, and then we hear whatever wonderful music you might have on your phone systems. So your phone lines are muted, so you will not be able to ask questions by phone. There are a couple of different ways that you can ask questions, and I'll show you that in just a second on the next slide. You will also be getting, at the end of the webinar, later today, you will be receiving a survey from Antonio Adesi, our program assistant, just asking for your feedback about the webinar. Was it useful? Was it helpful? We take these surveys really seriously. We want to make sure that the webinars and the information that we're providing are useful to our folks. So the ways to ask questions, the first way is to submit questions through the chat box feature of the webinar itself. You'll see over here to the right of your screen, there's another bar, and that little tiny bubble that looks like a dialog box from a cartoon. If you click on that, you get to your chat feature, and then if you come down here to the select recipient, there's a Q&A. Drop down, click Q&A, type your question, and we'll be gathering those questions throughout the webinar, and there will be a chance at the end, and perhaps at some point during the middle as well, we'll stop and do a question piece. You can also email questions directly to me, Cindy Borden. I'm the Assistant Director of TA here at NCHB, and my email address is right up there on the screen. So you can email them, you can use the chat function, or if something comes up afterwards that you feel like you wanted to ask, you can also ask those questions through that survey that I mentioned, and we'll gather those up and answer them or get them to Pat so that they can be answered that way as well. So with that, I am going to turn things over to Pat and let Pat start our webinar. Pat, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I wanted to try to do something different. If you could advance to the next slide, please. I wanted to start off with talking about job retention and what job retention is. And let me introduce myself real quick. I'm Pat Tucker. I work with Advocates for Human Potential, and I work out of the Chicago office. And I'm not coming to you out of the blue. I'm not coming to you, I've actually done job development, and I had to focus on retention. So I know retention is a real issue. And I know that you spend a lot of time making these relationships with employers, and then you think you got a good match, and lo and behold, it doesn't work out for whatever reason. So I'm going to give you a few things today, hopefully to kind of jog your memory or to get you thinking about job retention a little bit more. Because in my opinion, job retention starts before the job. And feel free to throw questions at me. I'll go through this. I got a lot of slides to go through, but this is your chance to ask questions, and what you're thinking about, somebody else is probably thinking about it. So what is job retention? And I say that, and it's a real question because we could all be defining it differently. I know job retention for some people is keeping the person working, whether it's in the first job or the third job or the 10th job. So is that how you're defining job retention, or are you defining job retention as how long a person stays in one job? We really need to think about retention and make sure we're clear about how we're defining it at our agencies and how we want to define it. What do we consider a success? Is a success a person who has 5 jobs in a year but still has worked the whole year? And sometimes holding on to a job is a good thing, and sometimes people need to move on for whatever reason. It's not a good environment or whatever. Is that a failure, or is that still a success because they moved to someplace else? Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to do was to look at some research. There's not a ton of research on retention, but there is some out there. And what the research tells us is that the likelihood of somebody staying at a job is influenced by a lot of things. One being the overall economy. Another is the nature of the job, the type of employer, the industry. Some industries have higher turnover. So we as employment people need to really understand what the different industries are, what the different turnover rates are. Sometimes we put people in jobs that have a high turnover rate, and guess what? They lose the job and we're shocked. But that job had a high turnover rate, and it probably has one for a reason. Education and training also have something to do with how long people stay at the job. Gender, marital status, children, age, tenure, job satisfaction, personality traits, disability characteristics. All of those play a role in how long people keep a job. So it's not a simple process. It's not something that, there's one answer to helping people maintain employment. Next slide, please. So, again, look at the industries. A lot of times, in hospitality, I know turnover is high. We put people in the hospitality industry all the time, but it's a place where people are going to struggle, and everybody's struggling in that area. So we have to really pay attention to the industry and make sure that the veterans that we're serving know what industry they're going into, and that there may be high turnover and also low-paying jobs. There's a lot of turnover. Employers know that there's a lot of turnover. Retail, food services. It really, already has high turnover. And then we put people into those jobs who haven't worked in a while, and their chances for success are going to be even less than, someone who has been employed for long term. Looking at career progression. I know none of us want to be in a job that we are stuck in forever. Some people, don't have an issue with that. Some people, I've helped one person get a job, and he was a bagger, and he did not want to do anything other than bag groceries. That was his ideal job. He got to do it. He was good at it. He did not want to be promoted. But that's not the norm. A lot of people want to be promoted or want to at least have the chance for promotion. So that also is something that people are looking at. Next slide, please. So in this study that I found, and I was looking a lot for different studies because I wanted to come with information that was proven. Not just from information based on my experience or the experience of when I talk to different people. And so I found this longitudinal study, which is a study that was done over time. It lasted for 48 months. So for 4 years, they followed the same people. And when we're talking about people, we're talking about the participants in this study had mental health issues and substance abuse issues, or physical health issues, or all of them. I mean, some people had every issue, and they studied 687 people, and over 4 years. And out of those 687, 80% of the people that responded to the survey had worked continuously over a 24-month period. That doesn't mean one job, but it means that they worked for at least 2 years. 70% of those people worked for at least 35 hours or more per week. 31%, or 213 of those people, did not experience any work interruptions over the 4 years. So 213 out of 687 of the people worked for the entire 4 years, which means that, I'll take 31% of the people working for 4 years. That's awesome to me that that many people stayed working for that long. Next slide, please. The people who encountered some types of interruptions or, unemployment were from different reasons. Psychiatric conditions, there were 24% of the people, psychological issues got in the way. 12% were laid off. Medical conditions, 8%. Family or personal situations, 5%. A lot of these things had to do with stuff outside of the person. Medical condition is something you can't control. The job ended, or laid off. The psychiatric conditions, that we may be able to do something about that, but that's that was 24% of the people. Next slide, please. So one of the things that they came up with in this study was what increased people's capacity to sustain the employment over 4 years, and they found 4 areas that were significant, and that was having a higher level of education and training. And that means for us, for the veterans, we're looking at the training. We're looking at what type of training they have. And for some veterans, it's going to be also looking at the education. People who were experiencing fewer mood fluctuations. So, people who were either seeing a psychiatrist or had their psychological issues under control did better. Having a job requiring creativity. Now, for some reason, that does not surprise me because, people want to be challenged. They don't want to have a job, or at least a lot of people want to be challenged. They don't want to have a job where they're just doing the same thing over and over again. They want to be challenged. And I see that a lot with the veterans. They want to feel like they're making a difference. Having a job doing a variety of things. So, going in and having to not, sit at one place and do the same activity all day. I mean, it's no different than what most of us want. We want variety. We want creativity. Next slide, please. And there were some other findings that came up. The consistent use of psychotropic medication, so people taking their medication. 49% of the people that took their medication did better. Now, this part I think is significant, is having the support of a spouse or a partner, support of a psychiatrist or therapist, a boss or supervisor, co-workers, friends, spiritual involvement, support of parents, support of other consumers, support through the vocational program actually only got 2%. So what that tells me is that we can't be the only support person that's supporting people in employment. There have to be other support systems in play. And I think that's significant. That means that we need to help people that we're finding jobs for have a network of support. And it can't just be us. We can't just be the only people out there trying to help them maintain that job. Next slide, please. And this is the part that I think is also interesting. The people that were surveyed and talked to, what they said about why they stayed at the job. The number one reason that people stayed at a job was because they had an interest in it and a satisfaction with what they were doing. That's 73%. So people wanted to be interested in what they were doing and satisfied. That's not surprising. That's what we all want. 43% wanted the opportunity for professional development. They wanted to grow. They didn't want to just be in a dead-end job. control I have over my work. People, 30%. Money was at 27%, and most times we think money is the most important reason. But according to the people that, were in this survey, money was not the most important thing. Flexibility, 25%. Flexibility is important. People want to be able, especially when you have kids or when you have a family or when you have to go see a doctor, you want to have some flexibility in being able to do that but still get your job done. I'm not going to read off all of them, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what the 600 and something people were saying that helped them to keep the job. And we have to listen to the people we serve, and if they're saying having an interest in what I do is the most important thing, then that has a lot of implications for how we can do our job and help people maintain theirs. Next slide, please. So making sure that people have satisfaction and interest in what they do. I came up with I didn't come up with them, but I found some different tools out there in case you have somebody who comes into your office and says, I'll do whatever job, I just need a job. I want to dig a little deeper. I don't want to give people just any job. And that depends. If they need money right away, then we have to talk about that. But if we want this to be a long-term position, then it's not just any job. It has to be a job that they're going to have an interest in. And sometimes people don't know what their interests are. I know it took me a long time to find out what my career aspirations were. I came out of college having no clue. Even though I had a degree, I didn't end up working in what my degree was in because I fell in love with something else, and I just happened on it accidentally. So if you don't know what you want to do, helping people find out what that next move is, what that next thing is. And so there's some free career surveys out there where people can see where they have an interest. They can do it on their own, or they can do it in your office with you. But just finding out what gets their juices flowing, what gets them excited, what is it that they want to do, and what type of jobs they want to be in. Do they want to be out there working with a lot of people or working on their own? And once we can figure out what people get excited from, I think we have a better chance of helping them to find that job that's going to keep them excited. So these are just a few of the places you can go on the Internet. They're all free. There are some places out there that charge to do interest surveys or set up, what your career is. But there are a lot of free ones, and it's a matter of finding ones that you feel comfortable with. Some of these are specifically for veterans, but really getting a good insight into what the person wants to do is important. If interest in and satisfaction with what we do is the most important thing, we really need to pay attention to where people are getting jobs at and making sure that it's something that they have an interest in. Next slide, please. This is very small, and it's probably hard to read, and I can send this out to and make sure people get a copy of it. But one of the things I like to do with people is do a sample job support plan, and this is basically looking with, and this is in the person's own words, what are their objectives? Once they figure out what they want to do, how do they get there? Sometimes the goal calls for more skills than the person has. How do they get to that end goal? And sitting down with that person and working up a plan with them. And, if you see on here, I have objectives, and there are the steps that they have to take to get there, and their dates. This is a copy that they have and I have on my file, and we keep checking in with each other to see how it's going. I have my stuff on here that I have to do for the person, and they have stuff on here that they have to do. In this particular case, this person she took a job, but she wanted to move up, and she wanted an opportunity to go back to school. So her job was work at this place for a while, and then talk to her supervisor about, what the opportunities were to move up into the company and go back to class and see if she could move up in the company. And her alternate plan, if the employer didn't have an opportunity there, was to start looking elsewhere. But this was all planned out before she even worked at the job for one day. We sat down and did a plan. And it wasn't my plan. This is all hers. It's in her words. It was what she wanted to do. She had to take on the majority of the tasks because it's her plan. And if I see a support plan where the employment person is doing all the work, then I start to wonder whose plan it is. I'm curious, are there questions out there right now? I don't want to just whiz through this and not let you have something to say. So I'm willing to open it up for questions. Right now, we got a lot more to go through too.
Pat, we had one comment that I thought was interesting, and this was this particular person works predominantly with veterans with addiction challenges. Mm-hmm. Despite having, being sober for a long time, once the income comes in and life starts getting busy, recovery services, mental health, that's the stuff that sort of goes away first once life gets busy. Those are the things that seem to be what folks have the hardest time keeping up with when they're busy are their mental health services, their recovery services, and that impacts retention. And so this particular person was kind of surprised that that wasn't one of the reasons they found for that interruption in employment.
Right, and I think, I was shocked too, and I read it over again looking for that. And I think one of the things is you have to talk about that up front before the person goes to work, especially if you know they have a substance abuse history. How are they going to deal with that once things get busy? How are they going to make sure to take the time out of their busy schedule to pay attention to that? Have a plan. That should be part of this job support plan. Going to meetings or finding a mentor or, whatever they feel like they need to do. I think, and this was my reading into this study, was the spirituality was one of the ways that a lot of people deal with the substance issue of it's going to church. And that was one of the things that was on the list was some people, they needed to have their spirituality. People deal with substance abuse differently. Some people like the group. Some people like the church. However people deal with it, but that should be thought out beforehand. I learned early on that I couldn't wait until people got jobs to talk about, okay, how are we going to maintain your sobriety if that's something they wanted to maintain? How are we going to maintain your clean and sober living? I mean, you're going to have money, and you're going to, what's your plan for how you're going to deal with that?
Thanks, Pat. I'm still accepting questions. I don't have anything else right now, but I'll let you know when we get some more.
Okay. If we can go to the next slide, that would be great. The support of a spouse or a partner, whoever that person is, I think for me this was significant because it means that we, even though we're there to support the person, we're not the key people. And when I started thinking about it, I thought, I've had lots of people, if the spouse doesn't support the person, they can end up sabotaging the person. Or, I've had, significant others sabotage jobs because they felt like the person was outgrowing them. And that means they can make a big difference in that person being successful. So at some level, we need to make sure that, when people are going through this process, if they have a significant other in their life, that they're on board with this also. And, that they're going to be there to support the person and help the person get through, the tough times and the good times. So I wanted to make sure we are aware of that we, as employment people, we're not the big reason why people maintain their job. It's coming from somebody closer to them. Next slide, please. The control that people have over their work was another biggie. Most people, and I've heard this with veterans, they want to have a challenge. They want it to mean something. They don't want a job that is meaningful. I think a lot of peers get into work in the mental health field because they feel like it makes a difference. A lot of people get into certain jobs because there's some reward there, and the reward is not necessarily financial, even though people need to make enough money to support themselves. A lot of times the challenges are what make it very interesting. The variety makes it interesting. And we need to make sure we're working with people, and if that's what they're looking for, if they want something that's going to challenge them, we have to find out how much of a challenge they want. We don't want to put them in a situation where it's going to be overly challenging, but we want to make sure that they have that in their place of employment to make this, keep it interesting. Next slide, please. The money, we have to put people in situations where they can make enough money where they can at least be able to afford the basics. If you give me a choice of making entry level money, and I can probably get $50 less on disability, I might go for the disability. Why work that hard if I'm not going to be able to support myself off of it? So we can't ignore the money. We have to look for opportunities that are going to give people at least a chance to make enough money, if not right now, at least in the short term, in the next 6 months, 9 months, that they'll be able to make enough money, that they'll be able to get money, raises or bonuses or something that they can support themselves. So even though it was only 27%, it's still important, and that goes along with, if you're living by yourself, it's going to take more money. If you're in a couple, and both people are working, then you have a little bit more play. But, sitting down with people and making sure they look at how much money they need to be able to make in order to survive in their environment. And I'm not, not going out buying the expensive stuff, but paying for basics, housing, clothing, food, those types of things. Next slide, please. And flexibility. This for me was a no-brainer. I need a job that I have flexibility. I don't need a job, if I need to say to my boss, I got a doctor's appointment, I really can't miss it, but I'll make up those hours. That's important to me. It's important that I be able to do that and take care of myself as well as get my work done. And that was something that was important to people. And I think because, they want to either maintain sobriety or take care of their mental health or take care of their children, having some flexibility at work is important. And, the more issues or the more things they have on their plate, the more that flexibility is going to be important. Next slide, please. The support of your supervisor. Each of us wants different things from our supervisors. When you're meeting with a veteran, it's important to find out what type of supervision they're interested in. Some people want to be told what to do. Some people need to get the feedback. They need to be told whether or not they're doing a good job, what they need to do to improve. Some of us don't. If I don't hear from my supervisor, I'm fine. No news is good news to me. I don't need somebody, giving me feedback. We all want different things from our supervisors. Having that conversation with the veteran up front is important because sometimes having a supervisor that you don't feel supported by can make or break you. It can make the biggest difference in how you do your job. So finding that out and trying to make a good connection with a supervisor that fits with that person is important. And it's not going to always happen, but, paying attention to that up front is going to be, for some people is a big deal. Next slide, please. The relationships at work. A lot of times your peers are what keep you coming to the office. They keep it interesting. You develop some close relationships at the workplace. Makes it fun. Doesn't feel like too much work. Those are important things, and trying to find places where if somebody feels like they need that they can get that at the workplace. I once helped a person find a job, and he was living a clean and sober life, but the job that he ended up working in, every Friday night after work, everybody went out to a bar to have a drink and to blow off some steam, and he felt like it wasn't a good place for him, and he had to keep saying no and keep coming up with excuses of why he didn't want to go, and he didn't feel comfortable telling people that he didn't want to be around drinking people, and he didn't feel like he fit in. So I didn't at the time. I had no clue. I had no clue of if that was what was that was going to be an issue. We learned the hard way, and we had to find him another place where he felt like he could fit in. Like, people didn't go out drinking all the time. They went out for lunch together, and he felt like he fit in more. So that was important. That was for me, that was something good. The culture of the place was something I needed to look at. Next slide, please. I'm going to take a little break because I wanted to talk about an e-learning course that we have for veterans that they can go through on their own, and it's all about retention. And they can do this in your office or at any computer, and it's great for people who are highly motivated or who are feel comfortable talking and learning about retention for themselves. Are there questions or things you want to throw in there? That I've been going pretty fast, but I'm opening up for questions.
Pat, we did have a question about whether or not folks should be documenting in case files why someone is not retaining a job. And I certainly could answer that, but I'll let you answer that. If you think folks, if there is an issue with retention for HPRP clients, if that should be documented in their files. Absolutely,
I would highly recommend, because it shows it. Sometimes you can see patterns. You can see. I mean, I've had people who just for my memory writing it down and just if we find another job saying, oh wait, you didn't like the supervisor at that place because the supervisor was always over your shoulder. I don't want to put that person in that same type of situation again. So yes, writing it down is important, and I think it's also helpful to keep a reality check when that person's saying I'll take anything because they want another job, but saying wait, the last time this was an issue. We need to slow down a little bit and make sure we find a good match. And I don't know if you want to add something to that, go for it, or if you disagree, feel free to disagree.
No, I totally agree, Pat. I think documenting in the case files both for future information for that individual client, but also future information for that employer. If you have other clients who may be placed there, then you have some insight perhaps into the culture or whatever, and that might help you make better matches for that particular client and then for other clients in the future.
Absolutely. So, I'm curious, what type of retention issues are people having? If you don't want to, throw them out there. What are people losing jobs? Are people not showing up for work? Are people going into the workplace drunk? I've heard them all. But what types of issues, or are you having issues with retention? And I'll just leave that out there. So if you want to write in something, feel free to. I'm going to talk about our website. It's an e-learning course, so it's all via the internet, and it's called Keeping Up the Good Work. Next slide, please. So for everybody here, retention rate at 3/4 following placement with a performance target for grantees to meet a minimum rate of retention of 65%. That's your goal. That's your outcome measure. So that's what we're all dealing with. So I just wanted to put that out there, and go to the next slide, please. So the experience, basically, we know that having supportive services is going to increase people's likelihood of staying at their job. But we also know that matching people to their preferences and abilities is going to lead to higher retention. So sometimes that first job might not be the right match, or sometimes they have to take a job in order to get some skill sets under their belt. But like I said, it's best to have a plan for how we're going to accomplish that, and not to just have it happen, not to just have them not understand that you might have to take some steps to get to the job you want to get to. Placements into jobs with employer-provided benefits is also it leads to a higher rate of retention. So benefits matter. Some people, want and need a vacation. Some people want to have the ability to put their kids into on their life insurance that's provided. So benefits make a big difference. So, we need to make sure we understand what benefits the person wants or needs from their employer. And keeping connected with veterans post-placement. One of the most successful things that I did, and it was by accident, was having some of the people who were employed be able to come and have coffee and just sit down and talk with each other. Because they could share their stories with each other, and it was very different than them sharing it with me. And they could support each other. Remember when we talked about one of the reasons why people maintain jobs, that support of other people that are in your same shoes is important. That was, if I remember correctly, that was in the 20-something percentile. So having other people, other veterans that they can talk to, not just us, is important because, even though some of us might be veterans, we didn't walk in their same shoes, maybe, struggling and having the same experience. So trying to set up some of those post-placement tools or ideas about keeping people engaged with each other is something that seems to help people. Next slide, please. So the Keeping Up the Good Work, you see at the top there's the link for it. I'm sure you'll all have access to this, and you can see there are different modules for the veteran to go through. And they can sit and go through it at different times. It's not a one-time deal. And we're going to give out more information on this. And there's also a handout for everybody that I'm sure we'll make sure you have, so you can have your veterans go through the retention course, and then you can have a discussion with them after they go through this retention course about what the plan is, how they're going to maintain this job. Next slide, please. So if you look at the different modules, the first module is an introduction to the course. The second one is how people keep their jobs. Then why do people lose their jobs? and managing stress on the job, using supports for long-term success and stability, and then there's the summary and conclusion. Those are things that are, people will be able to sit and go through and think about, and for some veterans that may trigger some thoughts about what they need to do, because I strongly believe that we need to make sure that the veteran is at least pulling 51% of the weight. And if we're 51% and they're 49%, we need to back off a little bit. This is their bus. They have to drive it, and that means they have to take some ownership of this. And one of the things that this course does is give them some ownership in their own retention. It's not just up to us to help them retain the job. Some of it has to come from them. Next slide, please. And so this is just, you can see what it looks like, what should Rhonda do, and this goes through. They can sit there and they answer. There are some quizzes, not, nothing rocket science, but, just some things to think about for people who are getting a job and giving them some real life situations and what would they do in that situation. Next slide, please. So, and then after you answer the question, you get what the correct response is, or why the response is incorrect. Hopefully, this helps people to get a sense of how they should handle situations on the job, how they should handle conflicts or issues with other coworkers. And so I highly recommend, if you have veterans who are getting jobs or looking for jobs, that they go through this and not wait until something happens on the job to go through, looking at retention. Next slide, please. Again, more questions. Just wanted to give you a sense of what they were going through. I actually went through the course just to see how it was, and I find it to be very useful, and I think some of the veterans will find it useful also. Next slide, please. If you see this one, it's looking at triggers, and this gets back to the substance use. Having people recognize before they start working, what are the triggers? What's gonna cause you to either, start using again, or think that you don't need to take your medication anymore. Recognizing that all job loss is not personal. Sometimes, people lose their jobs and it's not about them. It's about, the funding ran out or the place was in financial straits or whatever. Having a support plan. Who are they going to go to for support? And if the support plan is just you as the staff, that's a problem. We need to make sure we try to get more supports for people. Again, this goes back to the fact that people need more support than just us, and that we can't be it for everybody. Looking at their personalities. Personalities can make or break jobs. If you don't fit in at the place, if I've had veterans tell me, this place felt too loosey-goosey. No, people didn't seem to be driven, and it was not a good fit. They didn't feel comfortable there. That's something you got to take into account. Culture at a job is important for people. So, helping them to look at that, helping to identify that with employers. What is the culture like at this place? Wanting to make sure it's a good match with that. And having a plan for moving on before you quit the job. We always talk about that up front. Don't just quit the job. Let's set up a plan. It's okay if it didn't work out. But we want to teach people the right way to leave a job and how to move on to the next job. There's a way to do that so you don't burn bridges. That you can, for us, we may be able to get another person into that job if the person leaves in the right way. So We have to talk about that up front, though. We can't wait until they've already left the job. So I always talk about that up front before they get a job. Next slide, please. They have to have a notebook. They have to sit there. We want them to be taking notes and taking minutes because they'll have to come up with some of their goals. That goal plan that I showed you earlier, it has to be in their own words, and this is part of what they're going to be working on. You may need to sit down with them and help them flesh it out a little bit, but this should be their plan. What do they want to do? What's their next step? What are they seeing as their future? What are their triggers? How are they going to deal with them? Next slide, please. And then they get a certificate of completion. The hope is, and time will tell if when people go through this, how much of a difference it makes in that. We would love to get your feedback on, what you think of the site, if you're having people use it, and what do they think of the site. Because we want to have continuous improvement. We want to make sure that what is being put out there is helping people and adding to what you're doing. Next slide, please. So here's you can contact me. Here's all my information. We do have a handout. I'm hoping that we can get that out to you for if people want to go to the website for Keeping Up the Good Work. And we would love feedback. Next slide. So I wanted to leave some time for people to ask questions. I know I went through that rather fast, but I felt like I had a lot to cover. Are there any questions?
Yes, Pat, we have quite a few, so I'm going to try and sort of consolidate into themes and let you get through as many as you can before I wrap up. One of the challenges people were having was placement and retention as far as folks involved with justice-involved veterans. So criminal background issues, it's hard to place them, and it's also hard to keep them in those placements. So I'm wondering if you have any insight for those folks on that.
Yeah, that's one of the big issues is finding employers that are willing to work with people who are justice involved. The luck that I've seen, and from just talking to different people out there finding employment, is going with the smaller employers first. Going with bigger companies and bigger, they don't have as much flexibility in hiring people with backgrounds. The other thing is working with people on how to talk about their backgrounds. How do you talk about your background with an employer? You have to practice that so that people can talk about it. Here's what happened. That's in my past. Here's what I've done, and I paid my time, and here's what I'm doing now to move on with my life. And just making sure people feel comfortable having that talk. My first thing that I do with people, and when I was doing employment, was I want to get them in front of the employer so they can sell themselves to the employer. If I could get them in front of the employer, and we have worked on, how are you going to talk about this? Most times I was able to get them in the door, but this was with the smaller employers. I didn't start with larger employers because a lot of times that flexibility isn't there. The system is too automated for people to get in the door. But with smaller companies, if you can get the person in the door and they are able to talk about in a way that is convincing and sounds legit, most times you can get them into jobs.
Thanks, Pat. And that connected to one of the other questions we had was about folks failing to disclose their justice involvement in their criminal histories, and then that leading to their employment being terminated. So your insight there about talking to folks about how to make that disclosure, I think, is really helpful. Another set of questions we got was around the fact that a lot of these veterans are getting jobs that are low paying enough, so they're not actually equal to the cost of living, and or in some cases they've had informal jobs where they aren't paying taxes and they aren't doing those things. So getting them to switch from a job where they're getting $10 an hour with no taxes to then take a legitimate job where they are getting $10 an hour but are paying taxes and they're getting less and they're not able to really live off of that. Advice or suggestions for those issues?
Well, that's a big issue. And I think sometimes we need to sit down with people and look at how much what do they need to survive off of. And one of the things I had to do, and I just did this with my brother. He's looking for a job, and we had to look at what are his bills, what costs does he have, out there? How much is the rent? How much is food? How much is all of the bills he has to pay on a monthly basis? How much is transportation? And we came up with the figure that if he made less than this, he wouldn't be able to make it. So, we had a starting point. And then trying to find a job that matched that. And if we couldn't find a job that matched that, trying to have a plan for how we could get to that point fairly quick is important. How are we going to, is this job, is there room for growth? Is there room for you to get a promotion? Talking to the employers about how often can people get raises? What do people need to do to get a raise? Making sure people have all the information they need to do so they can make a smart choice about, can I do this job for 6 months knowing in 6 months I'll be making enough money to support my family, or if it's not doable, we can't put people in that situation where they can't pay their bills. So it's just making sure they have all the information so they can make a good choice, and trying to find employers or employment that if they're not going to make that right away, how long will it take for them to get there?
Thanks, Pat. I appreciate that. You mentioned transportation and talking about your brother, and that was one of the other challenges and issues that folks seem to mention is the whole idea of transportation and folks losing jobs because their transportation isn't reliable or they don't have transportation. Any insight that you can provide on that challenge?
Well, a lot of that is about being creative, especially in smaller cities where there's not a good transportation system. I've actually had some luck, not a lot, but some luck talking to employers, especially employers who need people and, people can't get there, asking them to help, do you have ideas? I've set up situations where people could carpool with another worker and get to work. Also looking at other employment programs who may be having the same issues and seeing if you can partner with those programs to come up with a solution. Maybe it's finding one person that has a car and everybody donates, or not donates, but give money for gas to get back and forth to work. Sometimes you just got to be really creative, but don't hesitate to talk to employers. If you have people who can work there, but the transportation is an issue, sometimes employers are willing to work with you on how do we get people here. Maybe they know somebody who is willing to carpool, and you can pay that person as the money you would spend for transportation to help get to and from work. And also looking at other programs. I know there are a ton of programs out there who give out transportation vouchers. One of the things that, some programs do is give out transportation vouchers until people get their first paycheck. So it's about being creative. It's about trying to figure out what other services are out there, what are other people doing, talking to employers about it, trying to get them to, know that there's a workforce, but people can't get there. So how, is there something they can do on their end?
Great. Thanks, Pat. We're getting close to 3 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of folks' time, but we had a couple more questions that I was hoping we could get to. One of them is around folks who are getting employment, but there's a lack of incentive to retain their employment, either because they're waiting for service-connected disability to come through with those benefits, and once those benefits come through, they have no interest in retaining their employment, and or perhaps they're getting transitional housing through SSVF, and they have sort of that cushion, and so retaining their employment becomes less of an urgent need. Any ideas on folks in those situations, or what our program folks can do to stress the importance of retention and help those veterans?
Well, I think sometimes looking at the numbers, I mean, it's hard to convince somebody if they can make more money on disability, on service connection, if they get more money on that versus working, it's kind of hard to make that argument. But if the money's equal or they're getting more money from working, looking at the numbers, here's what you can do if you keep working. Here's, you're going to have more money in your pocket. And I'll go back to, I think people are willing to work and will like working if we do a good match. It has to be a good match. Remember that 73% of the people wanted that good match. They wanted a job that they had an interest in, that there was something there for them. If we can do a good match up front, I think more, I'm not saying everybody, but more people would want to stay at the job if they felt like it was rewarding in other ways other than, it's just a job to go to. So it's that match. That match is important.
Right, great. And the last question that I think we have time for is the idea that, there's a lot of veterans out there that have employable skills, but they're militarily connected. Maybe it's a security clearance that they've lost, or maybe it's their military competencies, but they're not quite sure how to translate that.
Well, there are a lot of websites that will take their skill sets from the military and translate those over. So there are a ton of websites that you can go to and just put in, what they did in the military, and you can find out what skill sets those translate to in the employment world. And a lot of those sites will give you the wording, what jobs they qualify for. And if that's something they're interested in doing or continuing, then that's an easy one. But it's just going to those sites and taking in what they did and looking at, how to translate that into the employees into their language.
Thanks so much, Pat. It is about 2:58, so I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time. If there's any questions that we didn't get to, I'll make sure I get those to Pat, and that we'll get answers to those individuals. I think we got to most of them. I just want to say thank you to Pat. It was a great webinar. I think there's a lot of really good information here. As I mentioned at the beginning, you will be getting a survey from Antonio Adesi here at NCHV. Just to get your opinion, please look for that in your email and or junk mail. Sometimes some of us have spam filters, so things go in your junk mail. But we really do use those results to make sure that these webinars are as helpful as possible. In the meantime, if you have any other questions, you can always reach out to me, Seaboard, and NCHV. You can also reach out to Pat and our colleagues at AHP. I've put Pat's email address back up here. So, Pat, thank you again for a great webinar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and thanks, everybody. And please give me feedback. I would love feedback, and I want to make sure that you get a copy of the presentation and a copy of a handout for people to go use that website for keeping up the good work.
And, Pat, we will make sure when we upload the webinar presentation, we'll have the handout there as well next to it in a separate link so folks can download both of those things.
Great. Thanks, Cindy.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
All right. Bye-bye.